But we begin with President Trump pushing the bounds of political rhetoric even further this weekend, reportedly telling a gathering of Republican donors on Friday night that Democrats hate Jewish people, something that stands in contrast to how Jewish Americans vote and their broad representation in the Democratic Party compared to Republicans. Three sources who were there but were prevented by security from recording the event tell Axios that President Trump made the comments while referring to the recent anti-Semitism controversies with Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Trump said he didn't understand how any Jew could vote for a Democrat these days. He talked about how much he'd done for Israel, noting his historic decision to move the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And Trump said if he could run to be prime minister of Israel, he'd be at 98% in the polls. A campaign spokesman did not dispute the comments as reported. This followed the president's attempt to brand all Democrats as being against Jewish people due to the controversy around the Minnesota freshman congresswoman.
The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party, and that's too bad.
However, Jewish voters have swung even more to the Democratic Party in recent elections. Exit polls in the Trump era show that in 2016, Jewish voters favored Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump by 71% to 24%. Trump performing 8 points worse than Mitt Romney, and the Democrats did even better in 2018. After the accomplishments President Trump touted to donors, winning 79% of the vote to the Republicans, 17%. While members of Congress who are Jewish are overwhelmingly on the Democratic side of the aisle. Here's where we are, Joe.
Well, here's where we are. And the question is, Jake Sherman, is this what we're going to see over the next year or so if Donald Trump does, in fact, run for re-election? Is this a preview? Is he going to continue to paint Democrats as the anti-Jewish party, despite his own checkered past?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Ilhan Omar controversy, in which she has made comments that have been interpreted as anti-Semitic, and she has apologized for one, and Democrats took action last week to rebuke her lightly in a way that Republicans thought was a bit too light for their liking. They are trying to make the entire Democratic Party. It's kind of one of these moments where Republicans behind the scenes have been saying for many years that the Democratic Party was drifting away from its previous staunch support of Israel and things of that nature, and Republicans are saying it's finally coming home to roost. It's a convenient punching bag for the president, quite obviously. He is making one of the first Muslim females in Congress. He's putting her up on a pedestal in a sense and then knocking her down and saying she's emblematic of all Democrats, which is obviously not the case. Listen, I think the New York Times is a fascinating story this morning of Benjamin Netanyahu using Trump as the main centerpiece in his campaign in Israel. And we'll get perhaps a fresh test of what people think of President Trump when it comes to Israel's elections, which are April 9th. And Netanyahu is struggling, as he almost never has before, to retain the prime minister role. So I think we'll perhaps get an indirect test of what Donald Trump said, which is he would be at 98% in polls in Israel were he to run for prime minister.
Well, and again, we've said this before, but Nick Confessori, you actually look at the record, and it's pretty remarkable that Donald Trump of Charlottesville, who talked about moral equivalency between neo-Nazis and anti-fascists, the Donald Trump that put a Star of David over Hillary Clinton's face, talking about how Jewish money was going to buy the presidency, the Trump Republican Party of Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, of course, putting a tweet out before the election in 2018, basically saying that it's the Jews, the Jew money that's going to take over. And we cannot allow Soros, Steyer, and Bloomberg to buy, in all caps, this election. Of course, Kevin McCarthy selects 3 Jews and George Soros' name. It's an old, tired, anti-Semitic trope. Let me continue. Of course, Jim Jordan. I ain't reading anything. This is just, I could go on all day. Jim Jordan talking about Tom Steyer just last week, and oh my gosh, he's never done this with a Gentile, but he replaces the S in Steyer with a $sign.
Oops.
Jim, you think we can't figure out what you're doing? Again, if we want to add up anti-Semitic tropes, Nick, Republicans, they're going to win this one by a landslide.
You can go further back, Joe, to the 2016 campaign when David Duke supported President Trump, and President Trump was asked about it and refused to distance himself from David Duke and said he wasn't familiar with David Duke's views. If there is a repository for anti-Jewish sentiment in politics today, it is chiefly on the right, not only on the right, but if you talk to actual neo-Nazis, the thing you hear from them over and over again is that Trump is making the ideas of the far right and the neo-Nazis more palatable in the mainstream, and they see him as their guy in a mainstream way, in mainstream American politics. Now, there is plenty of anti-Semitism in the world, and Omer has been dinged for her comments, but it's ridiculous to say that the left is the repository for all of these things. What we're actually seeing here is a fight over the current kind of rulers of Israel and the current president of Israel, Netanyahu. It's mostly about him.
Yeah, you know, Richard Haas, it is interesting what's happening in Israel right now. Netanyahu is embracing Donald Trump. Donald Trump did talk about moving the embassy to Jerusalem and moved in that direction after presidents of both parties had been promising to do so for years. And yet, of course, the sentiment not only towards Trump, but Netanyahu in the American Jewish community is more than split.
You're right. The American Jewish community is split. There's a percentage, I think probably a minority, that is strongly backing Bibi Netanyahu and will largely vote here on the basis of policy towards Israel. And there's, I think, a larger percentage of American Jewry that will vote on the basis of the whole range of political issues. But there is a lot of support. It's interesting what Bibi Netanyahu is doing, Joe. It's not just the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. It's also the anti-Iranian policy. Essentially, he is getting as close as he can to Trump, and also because of the so-called peace process, the idea of working with the Saudis and others. There's a real paralleling between Bibi Netanyahu's position on big issues and the Trump White House.
Yeah, Adrian, the Democrats, how are they going to respond not only to Trump this past week, but also to continued problems from freshman members of their own class? By the way, this is not new. Like, we caused so much problem. In 1994, we came in, and one of us was saying something stupid every day. And when we weren't saying something stupid, Newt Gingrich was saying something stupid. At least Democrats have Nancy Pelosi. But, just this weekend, AOC calls FDR racist, calls the New Deal racist. You have a different anti-Semitic remark seemingly coming every week. Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership, man, they are shoulder to shoulder, strong, speaking out against that anti-Semitism. Just curious, though, what's their next play? What's their next act moving forward if this continues?
Well, part of the problem, Joe, as you know, is that when you have more Democrats in Congress, you're more apt to say there are more people in the party who are going to say things that are not, that may not be politically correct. We have a very diverse caucus. I'm certainly not going to stand here and defend some of the comments by AOC and some of the other members. But at the same time, these are women who have their own opinions, and they have grown up in an age in politics where they are, and they were largely elected, by the way, to speak their mind. Certainly not defending that, but they have, certainly earned the right to go out there and say what they believe. And I think it's also important to note some of these members are representing communities in their districts who have been large targets by Donald Trump. So they're going to Washington showing, we're angry. We are here to represent the constituents in our district who have been essentially persecuted by Donald Trump since he's been in office and since he, frankly, has been running for president. So I have a little bit of sympathy towards some of these members who are coming in with a little bit more of a hard edge, but at the same time, this is why we have Leader Pelosi. She can whip that caucus into shape like nobody else. And I cannot imagine anybody else being the speaker right now who can really try to unify her caucus around some of these issues.
Yeah, you know, Mika, a hard edge is something we certainly understand that. Obviously, though, you have leaders that are making, you have members that are making Nancy Pelosi's job and any Democrat who would want to defeat Donald Trump, making their job far more difficult with every reckless statement that they make. And I will tell you another phenomenon that mirrors 1994. You know, we in the freshman class could say something extraordinarily stupid, and despite the fact we were backbenchers, that's what the press would seize on.
Yeah.
And they would make us, or whoever the radical was, the face of the Republican Party. You now have the press doing that. You know, AOC, she got, I think she won her primary, which was basically her election. She got 15,000 votes.
Right.
She won by 3,500 votes. She got 15,000 votes. Hillary Clinton got what, 63, 64, 65 million votes? I think the press needs to keep everything in perspective.
Totally agree with that.
I know they like to chase the latest fad, but they've done it with Republicans for years, focusing on stupid comments by backbenchers. I think they probably need to keep this in better perspective.
Well, I mean, they represent their districts, their communities, but they also now have to work on a national level, working with other members of Congress, and they have a lot to learn. I think that's safe to say, some of these freshmen.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.